A fierce battle is raging in the skies of Southeast Asia. The region's growing middle class is taking to the air like never before, and budget airlines are fighting for the biggest slice of the market. I'm Steve Chow. On this episode of 101 East, we ask, are these cheap carriers sacrificing safety in their pursuit of passengers?
It's 5 a.m. at the private Nusa Flying International School in Jakarta. About 30 young men have already been on the go for half an hour. The school is run by ex-Marines, and the military atmosphere permeates everything. 19-year-old Ilham Fauzi has wanted to be a pilot for as long as he can remember.
The first reason why I want to become a pilot is because, personally, I love traveling, and the second one is my father is a pilot, so I inspired by him to become a pilot.
Anabey, go! Anabey, fly! Anabey, high! Anabey, go! Fly high!
Kalian adalah calon penerbang atau calon pilot yang mana kalian akan punya tanggung jawab yang besar. Ya. Kalian akan mengendalikan pesawat. Di belakangmu itu hampir 300 manusia yang bergantung kepada kalian. Ya. Kalau kalian tidak bisa mengawaki pesawat itu, ya 300 itu yang akan jadi korban kalian. Jelas?
Siap!
The most important thing about being a pilot is discipline. You have to be disciplined no matter what, because a pilot is a high-risk job.
Ilham Fauzi's sights are set on one of the most successful of the new low-cost airlines, the airline his father flies for, AirAsia. But if Ilham achieves his goal, he'll find himself in a very different world, the free-for-all of Indonesian aviation. AirAsia's owner is the flamboyant Tony Fernandez. He's Asia's answer to Virgin's Richard Branson. In fact, the two are bosom buddies. In a PR stunt, Branson dressed up as a female flight attendant and hammed it up for the press with Tony Fernandez, promoting their friendship to the world. In 2001, Fernandez bought AirAsia from the Malaysian government for a pittance.
14 years ago, I bought AirAsia for 25 cents.
Now he's worth more than $550 million and even played the Donald Trump role in The Apprentice Asia.
For that reason, you're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
I knew my rent was gonna be late about a week ago.
From his original base in Malaysia, Fernandez branched out across Asia. He owns airlines in the Philippines, Thailand, India and Indonesia.
Hey, let's get it now.
Ini pesawat baru AirAsia. Seluruh armada AirAsia adalah pesawat baru. Kecuali saya, sudah lama terbang dan penuh pengalaman.
Kini siapapun bisa terbang dengan armada baru AirAsia.
But all the glossy advertising in the world can't hide a terrible truth: Indonesia's shocking airline safety record. Nothing exemplifies that more than what happened in the skies over the Java Sea 3 days after Christmas in 2014. The damning details came out in a report at the end of last year. It's the morning of December 28, 2014 at Surabaya Juanda Airport in Indonesia. An Indonesia AirAsia Airbus is on the tarmac. The crew's preparing the plane for takeoff. On board are 155 passengers and 7 crew, many heading to Singapore to enjoy the New Year festivities. In charge of the flight is Captain Erianto, a former Air Force pilot with 20,000 flying hours. His deputy is Frenchman Remy Emmanuel Plessel, with just 2,000 flying hours.
Good morning. We're in S501, good morning, join the tower, go ahead.
Indonesia AirAsia flight QZ8501 takes off at 5:30 a.m.
Pushback and subproof, heading west runway 10 exit 02.
At 6:12 a.m, the flight crew contacts Indonesian Air Traffic Control and asks to climb from 32 to 38,000 feet to avoid bad weather. But with other planes flying above the Airbus, the climb request is denied. Within 6 minutes of this last communication, the AirAsia plane disappears from radar. Those minutes are terrifying. For this aircraft has a problem. There is a soldering crack in the rudder limiter, a device that prevents excessive movement of the rudder at higher speeds. Pilots have known about the fault for at least 12 months because the computer has issued 23 alarms about it. Engineers have shown pilots how to override that alarm. On this particular day, the alarm goes off 4 times. Each time, the captain resets the flight augmentation computer. But after the 4th time, he does something he's seen an engineer do when the plane was on the ground. In frustration, he gets up, goes behind his seat and resets the FAC function on a separate panel. He's not authorised to do this in the air. It clearly states so in the Airbus manual. From this moment on, the plane is doomed. The autopilot is off. The captain's action causes a deflection in the rudder and the plane banks sharply, rolling to the left. The co-pilot tries to correct the roll, but takes the wrong action. He pulls back on his control stick and the aircraft climbs before heading into an aerodynamic stall.
Stall.
Tragically, the captain then shouts conflicting instructions to his co-pilot. Pull down, when the proper term is nose down. In the confusion, the co-pilot pulls up again on his joystick, while the captain is pushing down on his, the correct procedure to avoid a stall. So the plane averages out the instructions with catastrophic results. The plane plummets from 34,000 feet into the Java Sea. So extreme is the force that the plane's wings are ripped off. All 162 passengers and crew are killed.
Kita kumpul bersama, ikut pesta ulang tahun si cucu itu.
It's a day Chokro Hewanto and his son Bernard will never forget. Chokro's younger brother, Jarrett, and his wife Ernawanti and their son Kevin all perished on that plane.
Sejak itulah kita tidak ketemu lagi. Sampai hari ini dia betul-betul meninggalkan kita selama-lamanya. Dengan anak, istrinya semua. Dan dia tidak meninggalkan pesan satu kata pun pada saya. Ini jiwa dia yang tidak kita lupakan. Saya sangat tidak bisa melupakan hari terakhir itu.
Bernard Hewanto fears that his aunt spent the last moments of her life in a state of terror.
Ernawati has a phobia of flying, so I could only imagine that, you know, any turbulence caused at that time would probably cause mental damage to her.
It must have been incredibly terrifying for them.
Devastating, yes.
On the day of the crash, Air Asia Indonesia broke the rules, as it wasn't even supposed to be flying that route on a Sunday.
It sends us to no end, and it also bedazzled us that a company like AirAsia could let something like that happen. We thought that they should be much more careful in the future in terms of plane maintenance, staff training, and other pertinent things related to that.
The final report into the AirAsia crash is shocking and raises many questions. Why did AirAsia allow its aircraft to fly for 12 months with a recurring maintenance fault? Why did none of the pilots demand its grounding? And why hadn't they received high-altitude training? And in all of this, where was the aviation regulator?
The regulation is not weak, yeah, but the implementation of the regulation, that's maybe, yeah. Because,
Retired Air Marshal Chappie Harkham is the former chief of the Indonesian Air Force, who's now a senior advisor to the Transport Ministry, which includes the Indonesian regulator.
Between 2000 until 2010, we experienced a very fantastic growth. That's between 10 and 15% per annum. You can imagine that's very, very fast. Unfortunately, the growth, that 10 and 15%, is only for the growth of passengers, not followed by the availability of pilot and technician and shortage of availability of our infrastructure in the whole of the country.
He's especially shocked by AirAsia's failure to fix the rudder limiter.
Because AirAsia Indonesia maybe know the weakness of regulator, the weakness of the Department of Transportation. It's not quite good in observing and make the close monitoring. So that happened.
Indonesia's aviation regulator, the DGCA, the Director General of Civil Aviation, was created in the early 2000s to coincide with the deregulation of the aviation market. The combination of unfettered growth and a weak government regulator has had some disastrous consequences. The simple fact is, the Indonesian regulator is not up to international standards.
The fact that Indonesia fails every single ICAO audit is a reflection of where they are, and it's not a good picture.
Jeffrey Thomas is the CEO of AirlineRatings.com, a website that ranks the safety of airlines and countries. ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organisation, is the UN body that governs aviation.
They audit each country's ability to oversee their airlines, oversee their airports, oversee air crashes, legislation, and the average compliance with international standards from Indonesia is roughly about 30%.
Indonesia failed the most recent ICAO audit in 2014.
They're still not that disciplined. And that discipline, be it from the flying point of view, be it from the air traffic control, the way you do things, it's got to come from the top. Safety doesn't start at the bottom.
Mike, not his real name, is an airline captain with more than 28,000 flying hours under his belt, who's worked alongside and trained many Indonesian pilots. He doesn't want to be identified. I asked Mike if he would fly as a passenger on Indonesian airlines, including AirAsia.
Only if I really, really have to. If there's no other way, I'll go. And I'll definitely choose it, if I can, a day flight. I'll choose a day flight, and if I get to the airport and there's thunderstorms and everything, I may even walk away from it. Maybe it's not a good idea to fly some of those airlines. Aviation is not very forgiving.
If lessons aren't learned, terrible tragedies result. The AirAsia crash is nearly identical to one shocking accident that happened 5 years before. In 2009, an Air France Airbus travelling between Brazil and Paris stalled at 38,000 feet and plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. Airbus sent out advisories to all airlines that their pilots should receive what's known as high-altitude upset recovery training. Essentially, how to get out of a stall at high altitude.
Our understanding is there are many Indonesian pilots who are not trained for high altitude upset, and these are the sort of things they really should be trained for. And this again comes from the regulator who sets the standards.
If Indonesia is to raise its pilot training standards, a good place to start is with the private schools, like Nusa Flying International School.
So does everyone have an airline they want to work for, or
Yeah.
a wish? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're AirAsia, are you? Yeah, good. What about you? Which airline do you want to work for? Which airline do you want to work for?
I want to join Garuda Indonesia.
Into Garuda, great. Yeah.
The best one.
It's the best one?
Yes.
But Garuda takes very few pilot trainees from private flying schools.
Routine aerodrome forecast valid for less than 12 hours.
Most students come here because they didn't get high enough grades to get into Indonesia's elite publicly funded flying school.
It's the wind and speed. 240 is the wind direction. I choose to attend the private school because in the public school, the selection is very strict and there are many competitors for all around Indonesia. Different from this private school. We just take the test and if it's good enough, and we just come enter.
And is your dad sort of proud that you're following in his footsteps?
Actually, my parents want me to become a doctor because my dad said, a pilot is busy, you fly every day. But it's already my passion. I said, I want to become a pilot.
Cockpit simulators are a crucial training tool.
Clear for takeoff, runway 24, runway.
The major carriers like Qantas give their pilots twice as many hours in a simulator as the Indonesian low-cost carriers. This is where every pilot should practice how to deal with scenarios like recovering from a stall at high altitude. But it's a matter of cost. More simulator training hours means fewer hours flying planes with paying customers. This is the Airbus simulator in Australia, where some Indonesian pilots come for their training. A number of them have failed their tests here, including one who was, quote, too uncoordinated to fly. But he and others went back to Indonesia and received their pilot licences from the Indonesian watchdog. The report into this incident went all the way to the top of the safety and transport ministries in both the Australian and Indonesian governments.
Well, it simply shouldn't happen. It's a serious safety issue, and it's something that the Indonesian authorities should be far more robust about.
We had an Indonesian co-pilot, which we failed outright. And he came back and he joined one of the local airlines. And he really was not capable of flying. How did he get back in? He knows everybody here. And yeah, he's flying.
And he shouldn't be flying.
He shouldn't be flying.
And former Air Force Chief Hakim confirms he's heard claims of corruption at the Indonesian regulator.
Once you compromise with regulation, that's one among others is a matter of corruption. It's a matter of bribery, but it's very difficult to prove it.
He says the low wages of the inspectors are a major problem.
Inspector pilot who employee of the Ministry of Transportation, they got a very low remuneration. they got only maybe half or quarter low by the if we compare with the take-home pay from the operation pilot in the airline.
For almost a decade, the European Union has banned most Indonesian carriers from flying into European airspace, with Garuda being one of the few exceptions. But even Garuda is banned from flying to the United States. Indonesia's low-cost carriers are desperate to get the bans lifted. One of the most ambitious is the Lion Group. It has several airlines: Lion Air, Batik Air, Wings Air, all serviced in a spanking new maintenance facility on an island near Singapore. It plans to have 700 jets by 2030. And to go with the brand new planes are hundreds of brand new flight attendants looking the part and ready for action. And all claims Lion Air well trained to cope with an emergency.
When you're doing the sliding position, the position it should be 90 degrees. Go.
Shoes off, leave everything, evacuate, come this way, jump slide, keep calm, remain seated, tenang, tetap duduk, keep calm, remain seated. Check outside condition, no fire, no smoke, no obstacle, slide on position, stand back.
It may look comic. The airline's safety record isn't. These young women have a better chance than most in their profession of having to put their training to use in deadly earnest. From 2002 to 2013, there were at least 19 incidents involving the Lion Group in Indonesia. Captain Jose Fernandez has been recruited from Spain to fix the airline's reputation.
Well, of course, there is always room for improvement, but we are committed to do it. We are committed.
But Fernandez fears that no matter how much Lion's standards improve, it won't get off the European blacklist unless Indonesia's entire aviation system, and especially the national regulator, shape up too. The relentless growth of Tony Fernandez's AirAsia Group was barely slowed by the crash of 2014. Just weeks after the event, he held a press conference in Sydney.
Obviously, this has been an incredibly tough period for me personally, my team. It's now we show why we're the world's best airline.
Fernandez used the occasion to spruik his new fares from Australian cities to Asia.
From the Gold Coast, the sale fare is priced at 67 Australian dollars. From Melbourne and Perth, $78, and from Sydney, 87.
Soon after the crash report was released, AirAsia promised to act on findings, including the flaws in their pilot training and maintenance programs. But Bernard and Choco Huanto believe that both the airline and the regulator have a lot of explaining to do. Like more than 100 other families, they're still coming to terms with the devastating crash that killed their brother and uncle. And they don't believe the problems have been fixed.
Itulah yang sangat kita sayangkan. Mengapa satu perusahaan seperti AirAsia tidak meneliti dan menjaga tentang keselamatan yang akan terjadi di dalam pesawat.
And we think this is an area where the Indonesian government can do more to not only set the rules, but to also enforce them, to weed out corruption. And this goes all the way from the top of the food chain all the way down.